Welcome, Jeff Klein. Please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Cole. And it's very good news that Rami is going to participate in the regular updates. I think it's really important to have a Palestinian voice, uh, weighing in. And I have a huge respect for Rami, and maybe as we move forward, if I'm there, if we're both there, maybe I can respond a little bit to what Rami says when he does the report.
Yeah.
So where the Israel and the pro-Israel people have been making a big thing of marking 600 days of uh, their war on Gaza, or as they put it, 600 days of hostages being kept in Gaza. And nobody knows how many people have been killed in Gaza so far. Officially, by names, it's about 54,000. Most people who look at that think it's a very large underestimate of the actual casualties, which may be upwards of 100,000, maybe more. And certainly, even if the destruction of Gaza stopped today, many more people would continue to die from the after effects of malnutrition, disease, sanitation, and so on. So, you know, it takes a certain kind of denial to refuse to call this a genocide, as we'll see. Now, uh, and Gaza, just as a reminder, Gaza itself is quite small. It's about the size, for those of you in Massachusetts, about the size of the Outer Cape from Orleans to Provincetown, but with at one time 2.2 million people in it. And for a long time, advocates of the Palestinian cause have been used to calling it, Gaza Strip as a whole, a virtual concentration camp. And Israel is moving now to create a literal concentration camp in the part of Gaza it has forced people to flee into. And their policy, expressed by the government and many Israelis, is to force the Palestinians in Gaza into smaller and smaller areas with the expectation that somehow they will be forced to leave and be expelled. And it sometimes, for liberals in the United States and around the world, it sometimes is a comforting thought in some ways to say that this is the policy of the extreme right wing in Israel and the Netanyahu government, when the reality of Jewish Israeli public opinion says that this view is much, much more widespread. There have been polling all along, and most recently, a really devastating poll of Israeli Jews that said the response was more than 80% of Israeli Jews favored the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. And a plurality, almost half, were in favor of the outright extermination of the Palestinians in Gaza. A majority is in favor of the expulsion of the Palestinians who managed to stay in Israel and become nominally citizens of Israel. And in all these categories, young people are more extreme as a group than older people in Israel. And I think it's no longer possible to look at Israel and say there's just a bad government or some bad people. We have to come to grips with the fact that Israeli Jewish society has become profoundly depraved in a widespread manner, and changing the government is not going to change that. And only by denial, though, of course, there are decent people in Israel, as there are in any place where there's a bad government or bad society. But to deny at this point that there is a genocide taking place, as most Israeli Jews do, when virtually every organization that focuses on this issue and every academic expert who deals with the issue of the Holocaust and genocide agree that Israel's actions come under the category of genocide as defined by the Genocide Convention adopted by the UN. And that includes, most ironically and sadly, the Lemkin Institute, which was founded to further the work of Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer who coined the term genocide in the aftermath of the Second World War to label what the Nazis did to the Jews in Europe. The Lemkin Institute is vehement and uncompromising in saying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And, I think we have to be frank about this. At one time, it may have been possible for some people, by ignoring what happened to the Palestinians, to kind of believe that Zionist Israel was fundamentally a legitimate project, but just happened to do a lot of bad things. And I think that is less and less tenable as a point of view with what we know now and we know as the history and what we observe today. Israeli Zionist society is profoundly broken and anti-human, in my view. And despite the fact that there are decent Israelis, a small minority, Israeli Jews, who are fighting for a different kind of society, just as under Nazi rule, there were decent Germans who lived in Germany and opposed Nazism. My view is that the Middle East, which has lots of problems, Israel is not the only one, but somehow the sort of de-Zionization of Israel, or denazification, if you want to use that term, is a necessary precondition for the region's progress. And I say this as someone who has been to Israel a lot. And, an exclamation point of this is a few days ago, Israel's annual Jerusalem Day, which is an overt fascist pogrom through the old city of Jerusalem. 3 years ago, I witnessed it firsthand. And, it was clear that this was a fascist, racist movement. And even 3 years ago, I could say, well, maybe not all of Israel is that way, but it's becoming harder and harder to disengage Israeli society as a whole from the racist and fascist tendencies, which are most explicit in the present government, but which are widespread in Jewish Israeli opinion. So I wouldn't have said this some years ago, but I do believe now that peace in the Middle East depends on the denazification of Israel. And I'm not happy to have that view, but I'm convinced of it. We have to take a sober view of Israel and its history, and also of the complicated ballet that's going on internationally around Israel's crimes. Some of you have noted France, UK, and Canada issued a strong statement opposing Israel's, atrocities in Gaza. The EU and Japan and some other countries issued a similarly strong statement. But if I had to characterize what those things are about, it's expressing the difficulty and discomfort of supporting Israel in the face of what it's doing and in the face of the mobilized opposition and repulsion of their own citizenship. And that's going on in the United States, too. I think the recent Senate resolution that never came to a vote, where all the Democrats supported a resumption of aid to Gaza, was essentially a message to Israel: we support you, but you have to stop doing things that make it difficult for us to support you. Because none of these countries, and very few in the Senate, are advocating pressure on Israel in a meaningful way. That is, sanctions, arms embargoes, and so on. And it's crystal clear that Israel will not respond in a substantive way unless there is major, major pressure concrete pressure on them. And hand-wringing, finger-pointing is not going to do it. It's only so far, it's only a small minority among our elected officials that are willing to say that out loud, and a few countries in Europe that are approaching that point. Spain, Ireland, Norway, who are seriously talking about advocating an arms embargo against Israel. But until that happens, this hand-wringing and finger-pointing is hypocritical. It's saying, Israel, don't make it so hard for us to support you. It's not a matter of really supporting the rights and lives of Palestinians. It's about expressing discomfort with what Israel is doing and the optics of it rather than the reality. And speaking of optics, Israel was compelled to open a crack of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And there was a report, which I can't say is totally confirmed, that among the first truckloads that were let in to Gaza was a truckload of burial shrouds. And, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if that's true, even though it's not confirmed, because this is a message that's saying, if you stay in Gaza, this is your future, death. And, you know, public opinion continues to press, but because of the lack of democracy, real democracy, it has had very little effect on the actions of our government. And instead, there has been a powerful movement to repress this opinion, especially on college campuses. But it can't repress thoughts. And it was very heartening in the recent graduations at Harvard, Columbia, Washington University, and St. Louis. Speakers defied their instructions and spoke about Gaza to cheers from the student body, to finger pointing from the faculty and discipline from the administration, but cheers from the rest of the students. And I think this is the future that we can see. Now, there's a lot of talk about Trump not getting along with Netanyahu and maybe putting pressure on them. I think it also falls in the same category of stop doing stuff that makes it harder for us to support you, because, of course, the U.S. is the main armor of Israel and financier and so on. But I do think there are some differences now that are coming into view, and that is especially around the issue of Israel's desire to have a war with Iran. The Trump administration seems to be sincere in trying to avoid that and coming to some kind of agreement with Iran. It may or may not be possible because of the extreme position that our negotiators have taken. But Trump acknowledged that he gave a message to the Israelis, don't do anything to destroy these negotiations. That is a unilateral attack on Iran. And Trump seems to be sincere in not wanting the U.S. to enter a large new war in the Middle East, which an attack on Iran would entail. So that's somewhat hopeful. Of course, the Israelis want their end game is not a denuclearized Iran, it's a destroyed Iran, because Iran is their major regional, antagonist in the region and has some power still. So we're at a very delicate time where, the issue of war or peace is on the cusp, and we can only hope that they'll reach an agreement in Iran. Elsewhere in the region, Israel continues daily to violate its ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, as it violates every agreement it has ever signed in Lebanon and in Syria. And the U.S. and the European countries are reaching out to normalize relations with this new self-appointed government of Syria, and maybe lessening sanctions. Now, people like me who oppose what is termed the Syrian revolution also oppose sanctions against Syria and any other country, in fact, where economic sanctions, hurt ordinary people. So I'm in favor of lifting sanctions against Syria, even if the present government has realized what we all feared, that the overthrow of the Assad dictatorship would lead to something worse. and that is the situation in Syria today, where people are being massacred because of their religious faith. So it's good news for the Syrians, even if their present government is horrific. Ordinary people should not pay the price economically by suffering because they have a bad government. I think sanctions against broad-based economic sanctions can never be justified on humanitarian grounds, no matter how much we don't like some government. So I'm going to stop now. I guess we're going to get into the politics and the legislation and so on, and I'm going to leave that for the further points in the agenda. And apologies for taking so long, as I tend to do.
Thanks, Jeff. A great update. So if there are questions about Jeff's analysis or comments, we can bring those up now. But then we'll go into the policy and legislation once we break to the next segment. Zarina.
Yes, I have several little questions. You say that the government is really on a tipping point of going downwards, and it sounds like the people are there too. Is this similar to the South Africa toppled in the past? And also, what about the Christian Zionists and AIPAC of this country? How much harm will they do? And lastly, I wanted to know, are you familiar with the Israel flag has the two blue stripes? And I heard those are two rivers that they want to expand to. But I just wanted to see. I just looked it up and it said something else.
There are people claim that the two stripes are the biblical greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. May or may not be true. I'm not sure that that's true. But I just want to correct you. I'm not saying that the government of Israel is on its way out or down. I'm saying the humanity of Israeli society is on its way down. And we can hope that that'll have some political effect, but so far not very much. The future of Israel as a society is very much in doubt. Certainly, its future as a humane society is very much in doubt, and my view is whatever short-term solutions there are, if there could be a two-state solution or some kind of movement in that direction, the problem of the depravity of Israeli society will continue, and that it will be a cause for war and strife and atrocities in the Middle East as long as it exists in its present form. And I know that's a pretty pessimistic, dire, assessment, but it's what I believe. And that just as Nazi Germany had to be denazified at the end of the Second World War, I also believe that Israeli society has to be denazified as well for any enduring peace.
Okay, thank you. Susan.
Yeah, I wanted to say that unfortunately, I agree with everything that Jeff was saying in his dire description. And I do think we have to keep saying this because it's so disconcerting to hear people say this is all Netanyahu once we get rid of Netanyahu and so on and so forth. In terms of genocide, it's good that Jeff pointed out the virtual unanimity of opinion now. And when people say, well, there are not that many people who have been killed, it can't be genocide, we should always remember that genocide under the convention consists of any one of 5 acts committed with the intention to destroy a group in whole or in part. And only one of those 5 acts is killing. So even if the large number, we don't have the large numbers, although proportionately they're very large, there are other acts that Israel is doing which people rely upon when they make the judgment that this is genocide. And one that has always stood out for me is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, which means destroying its universities, its libraries, its hospitals, its agricultural fields, its ability to make a living, its ability to give anybody what we would call a human life. So that's a good thing to say, to remember if anybody says, oh, but there are not all these vast numbers of people being killed. Yeah. The definition of genocide does not require that. And the final thing I wanted to say is I just read, it's a little bit of a cut above what Jeff has been talking about, which is people saying, please, Israel, reform yourself a little bit so we can continue to support you. Maybe a little bit of a cut above. Over 800 lawyers, academics, and former judges in the UK have published a letter on Monday demanding that the UK begin to sanction Israel and consider removing its UN membership, which would be maybe a little more than some of these other people are suggesting. And in doing so, they cite what has really stood in my mind for a couple of weeks now as a very good statement for us to remember, which is, and this comes from UN experts, states must act now to end the violence or bear witness to the annihilation of the Palestinian population in Gaza. That's the point at which we are, I think.
Yeah, and of course, I don't want to ignore the many righteous people all over the world that are really advocating for opposition to genocide. But again, that's a group of private citizens in the UK and not the government. And you can find that sentiment all over the world. In fact, I think it's the majority sentiment all over the world right now. But unfortunately, the governments are not moved by this. And the UK is a major arms supplier of Israel, and of course, continues to defend it diplomatically. So I didn't want to cast any aspersions on the decent people who are really saying the truth, but that the governments that are speaking out now are suspect. I don't really think they're serious about forcing Israel to change.
I agree. I wish we had 800 lawyers, academics, and former judges issuing a similar letter here in the States.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, we have a question in the chat from Rick Rothschiller. If there's time, I'd be interested in further elaboration of your analysis regarding the U.S. regime change operation in Syria and the new government's relationship with Israel.
So, Syria is a whole, complicated issue historically. I've been to Syria 3 or 4 times, I forget now, and it had a crappy government, like a lot of Middle East countries. It was not democratic, but it was secular. And although there was political repression, people were free to live their lives and worship as they please and live their lives according to what they desired. And, my understanding from the beginning of the regime change operation, which was supported by the United States, Turkey, the Gulf monarchies, and was that if the key force opposing the government of Syria were extreme Islamic fanatics, and that if the government fell, those were the forces that were likely to take control of Syria, which would mean going from bad to worse. And I think that's what has happened. And the U.S., by reaching out to this new government and offering the lifting of sanctions, is an indication that for the U.S., an al-Qaeda government of Syria and perhaps the partition of Syria was the lesser evil for them than a nationalist Syria that opposed Israel. The new government, of course, is already making overtures to Israel for a possible normalization, even without Israel giving up the territory of Syria that has occupied since 1967 and more so this year. So, strategically, this government change was worse for most Syrians. And there may be a really even more dire future for the people there. I think, among other things, if this government stays in control, it will be effectively the end of Christianity in Syria, among other things. So, sometimes you have to choose between lesser evils. We certainly know that if we vote, every time we vote in the United States. And my view was that an independent secular Syria was a lesser evil to a Syria ruled by religious fanatics supported by foreign powers. So, and here we got, that's what we got. And I'm